Emily Carter had always prided herself on being organized, punctual, and composed, traits that served her well as the executive assistant to Alexander Blake, one of the most powerful CEOs in the tech industry. At 28, she was ambitious but grounded, and working for a man like Alexander meant keeping emotions strictly out of the picture. He was known for his icy demeanor, sharp suits, and a stare that could silence a boardroom full of investors. Emily knew that one wrong move could cost her more than her job. It could end her career. That week, the entire executive team was staying at a luxury coastal resort in Monterey, California, where Alexander had just closed a multimillion-dollar deal with a group of high-profile investors. To celebrate, they hosted a formal dinner on the resort's oceanfront terrace. The menu featured filet mignon, cedar plank salmon, and a wine list that could rival Napa Valley's finest. It was the first time Emily had ever seen Alexander drink, truly drink, and to her surprise, he was relaxed. Almost charming. They shared light banter over dinner, and the tension that usually hovered between them seemed to fade with every sip of Pinot Noir. By the time dessert was served, Alexander had retreated to his room, claiming exhaustion with a half-smile. Emily stayed behind a bit longer, chatting with a few colleagues, not realizing just how tipsy she had become. The Pacific breeze was cool as she stumbled through the long hotel corridor, clutching her key card and squinting at the room numbers. The numbers on the doors looked blurry, as if the fonts were dancing. Room 312. 321? Wait, wasn't it 213? She mumbled to herself. Then, she noticed one door slightly ajar. Thanking her lucky stars, she nudged it open, kicked off her heels, and tossed her purse onto the nearest chair. Without so much as a second thought, she face-planted into the plush king-sized bed, mumbling, "Best mattress in the country," before promptly passing out, makeup still on, dress wrinkled. What Emily didn't realize was that she had entered the wrong room. And it wasn't just any room, it was Alexander's. Meanwhile, Alexander had returned from the celebration early, gone for a walk on the beach, and quietly re-entered his suite through the side balcony door. He didn't even notice the extra pair of heels by the armchair. Exhausted and buzzed, he slid under the covers and drifted off. Hours later, he woke to the unfamiliar sensation of something warm, breathing next to him. His first thought, "This is a very strange dream." His second, "My pillow has hair." His third, "Wait a second, what the hell?" And so began the morning that would change both their lives in a way neither expected. The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of room 321, casting golden streaks across the plush bedding and the dark walnut furniture. Alexander Blake stirred from his sleep, groggy but slowly gaining awareness. At first, he simply noticed the comfort of his California king bed and the lingering scent of sea air mixed with lavender fabric softener. But then, something shifted beside him. He turned his head. There, curled under the covers, hair tousled and breathing deeply, was a woman. His mind froze. For a man who lived life by routine, order, and control, waking up to an unknown woman in his bed, especially at a high-stakes business retreat, was not only unthinkable, it was borderline catastrophic. He blinked. Twice. Was this real? Then the woman let out a light snore. Not loud, just enough to make it undeniably human and undeniably real. That was when Alexander whispered aloud to himself, "This is not happening." Meanwhile, Emily Carter was blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb she'd become. Still nestled in the luxurious sheets, she rolled onto her side and groaned contentedly. "Best sleep of my life," she mumbled, her voice still hoarse from wine and ocean breeze. She reached out, intending to hug a pillow, but her hand landed on something firm and warm and moving. Her eyes snapped open. The first thing she saw was a broad chest. The second was Alexander Blake, propped up on one elbow, staring at her with a look of horror, confusion, and something dangerously close to amusement. Emily let out a yelp and launched herself off the bed. In doing so, she got tangled in the sheets, tripped, and hit the plush carpet with a dramatic thud. "What are you doing in my room?" she shrieked from the floor, eyes wide with panic. Alexander, now sitting upright, pinched the bridge of his nose and replied in his deep, measured tone, "Emily, this is my room." There was a pause as the pieces fell into place in Emily's foggy mind. She scanned the room, definitely not hers. The blue curtains. The suit jacket hanging on the chair. The familiar scent of cedarwood cologne. "Oh no! I walked into the wrong room," she whispered, her cheeks blazing red. "So it seems," Alexander said, folding his arms. "Though I figured it wasn't intentional. Otherwise, I would have called hotel security by now." Before either could say another word, a sharp knock echoed from the door. "Mr. Blake," came the unmistakable voice of Natalie, a coworker. Emily went pale. Alexander's expression didn't waver. "Hide," he mouthed. "What?" "Where?" she mouthed back. He pointed under the bed. Emily dove just as Alexander adjusted the covers and opened the door. "Good morning," Natalie chirped, peeking in. "Just checking in. You look tired." "Just the lighting," Alexander replied smoothly. When she left, Emily crawled out from under the bed, her hair a mess, her pride in pieces. "I swear," she muttered, grabbing her heels, "this never happened." Alexander chuckled softly. "Agreed. But it's a story for the ages." The next morning, Emily Carter did everything she could to blend in, to walk the resort halls like nothing had happened. Hair brushed, makeup applied, and blouse neatly tucked in, she looked composed on the outside. But inside? She was a swirl of panic and regret. Her single goal, survive the day without anyone finding out that she had accidentally spent the night in her billionaire boss's bed. Unfortunately, fate and resort gossip had other plans. At breakfast, she sat across from her friend and coworker, Natalie Benson, who was halfway through a bowl of fruit and yogurt parfait when she leaned in and whispered, "So, where were you last night?" Emily froze mid-sip of her coffee. What?" "You disappeared after dinner," Natalie continued, eyeing her suspiciously. "And you look, well, let's just say I've seen you more rested." Emily laughed nervously. "Just had trouble sleeping. New pillows, you know?" Natalie didn't look convinced. "Funny. Because I stopped by Mr. Blake's room this morning. He seemed different. Distracted. Like he had something to hide." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Maybe he just didn't sleep well either? Natalie narrowed her eyes. "You weren't in his room, were you?" "No." Emily nearly spilled her coffee. "Why would you even think that?" Natalie shrugged, clearly not buying it, but didn't press further. Emily breathed a silent sigh of relief, thinking she'd dodged a bullet. But by mid-morning, the whispering had started. 2 marketing reps at the coffee bar were giggling and glancing in her direction. A junior assistant blushed and looked away as she passed. Emily could feel it, something was spreading. And then came the final blow. During a break between meetings, Alexander Blake approached her with his usual cool confidence. "Walk with me," he said, not unkindly. They strolled the stone path behind the resort's main building, where the Pacific stretched out in calm blue beyond the bluff. Without preamble, Alexander said, "There's a rumor." Emily's stomach dropped. What kind of rumor? He turned to her, his expression unreadable. That we're romantically involved. That we spent the night together. Her face went pale. Who would even say that? Someone saw you leaving my room, he said, voice low and steady. Probably staff. It doesn't matter who. What matters is the Callahan investors heard it. And they're pleased. Pleased? She asked, bewildered. They value stability. Connection. A personal bond between leadership shows trust and long-term commitment. They think we're a couple. He paused. And it's helping the deal. Emily blinked. So, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying, he said calmly, we continue the act. Publicly. Just until the merger is finalized. Her jaw dropped. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? Exactly, he said, hands in his pockets. Attend dinners with me. Smile at the right times. No overacting. Emily shook her head. This is insane. Alexander gave a small smile. Perhaps. But it may also be the smartest business move you've ever made. Emily stared at him. And somehow, against her better judgment, her heart whispered, say yes. By that evening, the transformation had begun. Emily Carter found herself standing in front of a full-length mirror in her resort suite, smoothing out the fabric of a soft navy blue cocktail dress that hugged her modestly but elegantly. She hadn't worn anything this formal since her sister's wedding. Her heels were just the right height, 3 inches, not enough to kill her, but enough to fake the confidence she didn't quite feel. This wasn't just another company function. Tonight, she'd be walking into the cocktail reception on Alexander Blake's arm, playing the role of his girlfriend, his partner. And though she told herself it was only for business, the knot in her stomach wasn't entirely from nerves. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Alexander waiting, dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt, no tie, just enough to seem relaxed, but still impeccable. He looked at her, eyes pausing for just a beat longer than necessary. You clean up well, he said, voice even, but there was a trace of something warmer there. So do you, she replied, surprised at how natural it felt. They walked together into the main hall, where string lights glowed overhead and a jazz trio played soft background music. The Callahan investors were already there, sipping champagne and mingling with other executives. When Charles Callahan himself spotted them, he gave a broad grin and approached. Alexander. And Emily, he said with a knowing nod. So it's true then, what they're saying. Alexander didn't miss a beat. He gently placed a hand on the small of Emily's back, his touch firm but not possessive. Yes, he said smoothly. We're together. Emily smiled, not too wide, just enough to sell it. Her heart pounded louder than the music, but she kept her poise. Well, it's refreshing, Charles chuckled. Nice to see some heart in this industry for once. The evening passed in a blur of polite conversation, hors d'oeuvres, and carefully choreographed closeness. Alexander knew exactly when to rest his hand on her arm or lean in slightly when she spoke, and Emily surprised herself by responding naturally, laughing at the right moments, nodding, even touching his shoulder lightly as they chatted with others. But somewhere between the sparkling cider and the mini crab cakes, Emily began to lose track of where the act ended and her real feelings began. At one point, Alexander leaned close and whispered, "You're doing better than I expected." She turned to him, half smiling. "Is that a compliment?" "It is," he replied. And for a fleeting second, their eyes met, not as boss and assistant, not as business partners, but as two people caught in a moment neither had prepared for. Later, Back in her room, Emily kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of the bed, heart still racing. She stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror and whispered aloud, this was supposed to be fake. But deep down, a voice inside her replied, so why didn't it feel that way? The next day, Emily Carter sat beside Alexander Blake in the resort's main conference room, surrounded by charts, legal briefs, and murmurs of multi-million-dollar figures. On the surface, it was business as usual. But underneath the table, beneath the surface of every glance and subtle touch, something was shifting. The momentary touches from the night before had lingered in her thoughts like the scent of lilacs after spring rain. Harmless, fleeting, but deeply felt. Alexander, for his part, maintained his polished exterior. He spoke with clarity and poise, fielding questions from the Callahan board with confidence. But every so often, he glanced sideways at Emily. Just a glance. Just enough to make her heartbeat quicken. At lunch, the investors insisted they all dine together on the terrace. Emily and Alexander were seated side by side, overlooking the Pacific. The breeze was warm and salty, rustling the linen napkins and fluttering Emily's hair across her cheek. Alexander reached over and gently tucked a loose strand behind her ear. It was such a small gesture, barely more than a whisper of contact, but Emily's breath caught. And it wasn't because she was pretending anymore. "You're awfully quiet," he said under his breath as the others chatted about market trends. "I'm thinking," she replied, forcing a smile. "About? Whether this role we're playing has a script I don't know about." Alexander turned slightly toward her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Does it feel like acting to you?" Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. That night, after the meetings had ended and the sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and rose, Alexander suggested a walk. Emily hesitated, her sandals already off, her feet aching from a day in heels, but something in his tone told her this wasn't about fresh air. They walked along the quiet stretch of beach behind the resort. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and the ocean rolled in gentle waves beside them. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, softly, Alexander said, "You're pulling away." Emily glanced at him, startled. "I'm trying to remember that this is temporary." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "And if it's not?" She looked away, staring out at the horizon. "Then it's dangerous." "For your job?" "For my heart," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stepped closer. "Emily, I don't play games." "No," she said with a dry laugh. "You run billion-dollar companies. You win games." He smiled faintly, but his eyes were serious. "I didn't expect this either." They stood in silence as the tide came in, brushing over their toes. Finally, Emily turned back toward the resort. "We should go. People will talk." Alexander didn't move. "They already are." That night, as Emily lay in bed, her head resting on a pillow that still smelled faintly of lavender, she stared at the ceiling and asked herself a question she couldn't yet answer. Was she still pretending? Or had she already crossed the line, heart first? The final day of the business retreat arrived with the kind of golden sunrise that only California's coast could deliver. Seagulls cried faintly overhead as waves rolled onto the sand in rhythmic calm. Inside the resort, the boardroom buzzed with optimism. Contracts had been reviewed, terms finalized, and the Callahan deal was all but sealed. But for Emily Carter, something felt unfinished. She stood beside Alexander Blake as he gave a closing statement to the investors, his words confident and his posture sure. Yet every time he brushed her arm or looked her way, her thoughts drifted, Not to spreadsheets or merger clauses, but to the feel of his hand at the small of her back, the softness in his voice when they were alone. This was never supposed to become personal. After the meeting ended and handshakes were exchanged, the resort's bar filled with laughter and the sound of clinking glasses. Emily quietly slipped away, walking down the stone path that led to the beach. She needed air, clarity, and space from her own thoughts. The breeze tousled her hair as she stood barefoot on the sand, staring out at the endless blue horizon. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until they stopped just a few feet away. "I had a feeling I'd find you here," Alexander said, his voice gentle. Emily didn't turn right away. "I needed to clear my head." He stepped beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes also on the sea. "So did I." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of questions, of emotion, of things unsaid. Finally, Emily turned to him. "What happens when we go back, Alexander?" "To work, you mean?" "To real life," she clarified. "Because whatever this was, pretending to be your girlfriend, acting like there's something between us, it's going to end. Isn't it?" Alexander looked at her, and this time, there was no practiced calm in his expression. There was only sincerity. "Emily, I stopped pretending the second night," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I told myself this was business," he continued. "But I meant every look, every word. I don't know what you're feeling, but I needed you to know that I'm not playing a part anymore." Emily's voice trembled as she answered, "I told myself this was fake to protect my heart. But you made that impossible." He took a slow step toward her, then another, until there was barely a foot between them. "If you want to forget all of this," he said, "I'll walk away. But if there's a part of you that feels what I do." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Emily reached up slowly, her fingers brushing his lapel, and whispered, "I don't want to forget." And that was all it took. Alexander leaned in, not with urgency, but with reverence, and their lips met in a kiss that was long overdue. It was tender, steady, and so full of truth it left them breathless. When they pulled apart, Emily looked up at him, heart pounding. "I guess we're not pretending anymore," she said softly. Alexander smiled. "No. Not anymore." Returning from the coastal resort to the fast-paced world of downtown San Francisco felt like stepping out of a dream and into a reality that no longer fit quite right. Emily Carter and Alexander Blake resumed their professional roles, he, the sharp-suited CEO commanding attention in every meeting, she, the poised executive assistant managing schedules, briefing documents, and conference calls like clockwork. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Behind the closed doors of boardrooms and the glare of office lighting, a quiet romance was beginning to take root, deeply, carefully, and away from curious eyes. They kept it private, not because they were ashamed, but because it was precious. And in a world of public statements and press releases, some things needed to be protected. Their new rhythm was subtle but undeniable. A lingering glance in the elevator. A text message at 2:15 p.m. sharp, "Lunch today?" Rooftop? A handwritten note left on her desk, folded between pages of quarterly reports. "You were amazing in that presentation, just in case no one told you." Weekdays were busy. But the nights belonged to them. On Thursdays, Alexander would swing by Emily's modest apartment in the Mission District, often with takeout from her favorite Thai place tucked under one arm. He insisted he could cook, but after burning scrambled eggs once, Emily had gently suggested they stick to deliveries. They'd share quiet dinners at her small round kitchen table, barefoot and dressed in t-shirts and jeans, laughing over shared memories and learning how to simply be together, not as boss and assistant, but as two people who had somehow, unexpectedly, fallen in love. On weekends when work allowed, they'd escape to wine country or take long drives up Highway 1 with no particular destination in mind. Emily especially loved those moments, the windows down, the scent of ocean and eucalyptus filling the car, and Alexander's hand resting lightly on hers as if to say, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." What surprised Emily most wasn't the grand gestures, though Alexander had his moments, but the quiet consistency. The way he remembered how she liked her coffee, with a splash of almond milk, never too hot. How he always waited for her to unlock the door before driving away. How he kissed her forehead every time they said goodnight, even if it was just a brief stop between meetings. Still, they were careful at work. Professional. Measured. There were too many variables, stakeholders, reputations, and a very real need to avoid office gossip. But when the day ended, and the building emptied out, they allowed themselves to be real. One evening, as they stood in the parking garage after a long strategy session, Alexander leaned against her car and said, "You know, I didn't expect this." Emily smiled, slipping her keys into her purse. "Neither did I. But I don't want it to stop," he added quietly. She looked at him, heart full, and replied, "Then let's not let it." And just like that, under the flickering glow of a concrete ceiling light, they sealed their promise, not with signatures, but with a kiss meant only for the quiet places love often begins. It had been nearly a year since Emily Carter accidentally wandered into Alexander Blake's hotel room and changed both of their lives forever. Their love had blossomed not through grand declarations or whirlwind romance, but in quiet moments, shared coffee on Monday mornings, long walks after work, and laughter echoing through her kitchen on ordinary Friday nights. But Alexander Blake, CEO and master strategist, was never one to let something precious remain ordinary for too long. One chilly October evening, Emily returned to her apartment after a late staff meeting. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor, and the scent of cinnamon drifted through the air. On the dining table was a small note, written in Alexander's handwriting, "Come up to the rooftop. Dress warm." Curious, and slightly amused, she grabbed a jacket and climbed the stairs to the building's rooftop terrace. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. There, under strings of warm patio lights, was a small table set for two. A blanket draped over one chair. Hot cider in mason jars. And Alexander, no tailored suit tonight, just jeans, a navy sweater, and a nervous smile she'd never quite seen before. "Did you make cider?" she asked with a grin. "I tried," he said. "It might taste like warm apple juice with too much cinnamon." Emily laughed. "Sounds perfect." They sat for a while, sipping cider and watching the city lights flicker below. The fog rolled in gently from the bay, wrapping the skyline in a soft gray hush. Then, Alexander stood up. "I wanted to give you something," he said, reaching into his pocket. What he pulled out was not a velvet ring box. It was a small, slightly crooked silver ring, clearly handmade. The edges were uneven, the band imperfect, but somehow, it was the most endearing thing Emily had ever seen. "I tried to make it myself," Alexander said sheepishly. "Turns out, welding isn't a hidden talent of mine. But I wanted it to be different. Like us." Emily's heart swelled. He dropped to one knee, right there between the folding chairs and potted rosemary. "Emily Carter," he said, voice steady but full of emotion, "you've made my life messier, warmer, and more real than I ever knew it could be. Will you marry me, not just the CEO version of me, but the man who burns eggs, forgets the laundry, and gets your coffee order wrong at least once a week?" Emily laughed through the tears already brimming in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, holding out her hand. "But you're letting me pick the final ring." "Deal," he said, sliding the lopsided band onto her finger before pulling her into a kiss. They married the following spring in a vineyard just outside Sonoma. The ceremony was small, close friends, a few coworkers, and family seated on wooden benches beneath oak trees strung with lanterns. Emily wore a simple lace dress. Alexander wore the same navy sweater from the rooftop. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander leaned in and whispered, "Best deal I ever made." And as they kissed under the California sun, surrounded by laughter, love, and the smell of wildflowers in bloom, Emily knew that real love, the kind built on accidents, courage, and everyday grace, was the kind that truly lasted. Sometimes, the most meaningful chapters in our lives begin with accidents, moments we never anticipated, choices we didn't intend to make. The story of Emily and Alexander reminds us that love, growth, and connection often bloom in the least likely places: a wrong turn, an awkward mistake, a vulnerable conversation. For those of us who've lived through decades of planned careers, carefully built routines, and perhaps a few regrets, this story offers a gentle nudge. It tells us it's never too late to open ourselves to the unexpected, to let go of rigid expectations and welcome life's surprises with grace. More than just a romance, Emily and Alexander's journey is a testament to the power of emotional courage. They took a risk, not just professionally, but personally. They allowed themselves to be seen, to be vulnerable, and to love deeply despite uncertainty. In a world that often tells us to stay in control, their story reminds us of something deeper: that real connection comes when we loosen our grip a little. When we let people in. When we dare to feel, even when we're afraid. So whether you're 35 or 75, the message remains the same: life doesn't stop unfolding. Love, joy, and new beginnings can find you at any age, in the most ordinary or unexpected ways. We're never too old to start again, to take a leap, or to say yes to something or someone that makes our heart beat a little faster. After all, sometimes the best things in life don't follow a plan. They follow the heart.